The phone buzzed with my mother's name flashing across the screen. I answered, hoping it was just one of her usual check-ins. Instead, her voice carried a strange certainty. Mala, your apartment is perfect for Rena and her husband. They'll be moving in soon. You don't mind, right? My grip on the phone tightened as my eyes fell on the lease agreements neatly stacked on my desk. Perfect for them? She had no idea who truly lived there, or what I had built behind those walls. And when she found out, her carefully planned scheme would collapse into panic. Mala was sitting at her desk when her phone rang, her mother's name flashing on the screen. She picked it up with a small smile, expecting to hear the usual talk about groceries or neighbors. Instead, her mother's voice came firm and certain, almost like an order. Mala, your apartment is perfect for Rena and her husband. They'll be moving in soon. You don't mind, right? For a moment Mala froze, her heart sinking as if the words had ripped through all her years of hard work. She had saved every little coin, skipped meals, and worked late nights to build that apartment. Every wall, every corner carried her sweat and sacrifice. And now, just like that, her mother wanted to hand it over to Rena, as if Mala's blood and effort were worth nothing. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. Her mother didn't even ask politely. She spoke as though Mala had no say in her own property, as though her struggles and dreams were invisible, and all that mattered was making life easier for Rena, the golden child. Mala's grip on the phone tightened. She wanted to scream, to remind her mother that she wasn't a child anymore, that she had worked for this. But all she heard was her mother's calm, casual tone, as if this was already settled. In that instant, memories rushed back. Times when she was told to give her new shoes to Rena, when her school fees were delayed so Rena could get a new phone, when her own needs were brushed aside as unimportant. And now, even as an adult, her sacrifices were still treated like nothing. Mala felt a mix of anger and pain. She wanted to ask her mother, "Do you even see me? Do you know what it took for me to build this?" But her voice caught in her throat. Her eyes moved to the lease agreements stacked neatly on her desk, proof that her apartment wasn't just a building, it was her lifeline, her future, her pride. Her mother's words echoed again. They'll be moving in soon. It was said so easily, as though Mala's years of struggle could be erased with a single sentence. In that moment, Mala knew one thing for sure. She wasn't going to let anyone, not even her mother, hand over what she had built with her own hands. This was her fight now, and she wasn't going to step back. From the time Mala could remember, life had always been tilted in one direction. Rena, her younger sister, was the shining star of the family. She always had the best clothes, the most colorful dresses that caught everyone's attention. On birthdays, Rena's cakes were big and decorated, while Mala's own birthdays passed quietly with little notice. When new phones came out, Rena always got them first, sometimes without even asking, while Mala carried old ones with cracked screens and fading buttons. Mala grew up watching her mother and relatives shower Rena with praise. They would clap and smile at even her smallest achievements, calling her our smart one, our beautiful girl. But when Mala worked hard and brought home good grades, nobody noticed. Her report cards often ended up pushed aside on the table, forgotten in the noise of Rena's celebrations. Mala learned early that if she wanted attention, she had to work twice as hard. And even then, it was rarely enough. To pay for her own school materials and little things she needed, Mala took extra jobs after classes. She cleaned, she worked in shops, and she helped neighbors with errands just to make some money. She used to come home tired, hoping her mother would at least see her effort. But instead, she was told to give her money to help the house or buy something Rena wanted. Even her small earnings were never really hers. Every time Mala tried to stand tall, her mother's favoritism pushed her down. When Rena asked for something, it was provided immediately. When Mala asked, the reply was always, "Later, not now. Can't you see we have other priorities?" Those other priorities were almost always Rena. Mala remembered one painful day when she needed new shoes for school. Her pair was already torn, and she was embarrassed to wear them. She begged her mother to buy her just one new pair. Instead, her mother looked at her and said, "Rena needs one too, let's get hers first." Rena walked out with shiny new shoes that same week, while Mala had to keep wearing the broken ones. It was the same pattern again and again. Rena's needs were treated like emergencies, while Mala's were treated like inconveniences. This unfairness slowly carved something inside her. A mix of silence, strength, and determination. She decided she would stop waiting for recognition from her family. If they couldn't see her sacrifices, she would build her own life with her own two hands. What her mother and Rina didn't know was that those years of being ignored only pushed Mala to become stronger. While Rina lived in comfort, Mala was learning how to fight, how to survive, and how to create something that no one could take away from her again. Mala often thought back to the years when she started building the apartment. She was still very young, but her heart carried a weight much heavier than her age. After being ignored for so long in her family, she told herself she would not wait for anyone to give her comfort or security. She would build it on her own, even if it took everything she had. That thought became her guide, her motivation, and her only source of strength. Every job she worked, every coin she saved, went into a little envelope she kept hidden in her room. While others her age spent their money on clothes, outings, or small luxuries, Mala held herself back. She skipped treats, said no to new things, and even wore the same clothes for years. Each time she put money aside, she whispered to herself, "One day, this will become my home." It was not easy, but her desire to be free from being invisible pushed her forward. When the time came to buy the land, Mala walked into the office with her savings, her hands shaking but her spirit firm. The staff looked at her with surprise, not believing a young woman like her could afford such a thing. But she signed those papers with pride, her name written boldly as the owner. That was the first time she felt seen, even if it was only on a document. Building the apartment was even harder. Mala could not hire expensive builders or buy all the best materials at once. Instead, she moved step by step. One paycheck went into bricks, the next into cement, another into labor. Many nights she stood by the unfinished structure, watching it slowly take shape. Rain or shine, she visited, checking every detail, reminding herself that this was more than a building. It was her life's answer to years of neglect. There were times she cried from exhaustion, times she questioned if she could really finish it. But then she remembered all the times her needs were ignored, all the times her voice didn't matter at home. That pain gave her fire. She told herself she was no longer the invisible child. Each wall rising from the ground was her voice finally becoming solid, unshakable. Years later, when the apartment finally stood complete, Mala didn't just see bricks and walls. She saw every long shift she worked, every meal she skipped, every dream she held close when no one else believed in her. It was her proof that even the forgotten child could build something powerful. And deep down she knew no one, not even her mother, had the right to take it away. Mala's mother spoke as if the apartment was sitting empty, waiting to be handed over to Rina like a gift. But the truth was completely different. That apartment was not just a property Mala owned, it was a place full of life. Families already lived there, children played in the hallways, and hard-working men and women called it their home. Every room carried someone's story, and every tenant trusted Mala to keep that roof safe over their heads. From the very beginning, Mala had decided she would not let the apartment just stand idle. She had worked too hard for it. So she put effort into making it a home for others too. She carefully chose her tenants, people who needed stability just like she once did. They signed their contracts with her, each paper holding her name as landlord, each promise legally binding. Those documents were her shield, her protection against anyone trying to push her aside. Every month, the tenants paid their rent directly to her. And with that money she kept the building running. The water flowed, the lights stayed on, and repairs were handled. She treated them not as strangers, but as people who trusted her to do right by them. And they, in return, respected her deeply. Some even called her Sister Mala, because she was fair and kind, unlike many landlords who only cared about money. So when her mother spoke casually about giving the apartment to Rina, Mala almost laughed at the absurdity. How could anyone walk into a place already filled with tenants and claim it as their own? These were not empty walls. This was a community, and Mala knew her tenants would stand with her because their lives were tied to hers. Rina and her husband thought it would be easy. They imagined carrying their suitcases inside and taking over rooms as they pleased, but Mala knew better. She had legal contracts in her drawer, signed and sealed. No one could simply erase those agreements. If her mother wanted to argue, Mala only had to show the papers proof that she was not only the owner, but also bound by law to protect the tenants. What her family failed to understand was that the apartment was not just about bricks and money. It was about people. It was about the trust Mala had built with those who lived there. Each tenant was a reminder that she had created something that mattered to others too. And that trust gave her strength. She was no longer the invisible daughter. She was the landlord, the provider, and the protector of many homes. And no one could take that away from her. One afternoon, Mala heard a knock at the gate of her apartment building. When she opened it, her eyes widened. There stood Rina and her husband, both smiling confidently, each of them dragging large suitcases behind them. They looked as though they had just arrived at a hotel, not someone else's property. Without even greeting her properly, Rina announced, "We're here. Mom said this place is perfect for us, so we've come to move in." Mala's heart sank. She had hoped her mother's words were only talk, something that would fade away. But here was the proof. Rina and her husband had actually taken it seriously. They stood at the entrance as if they already owned the place. When Mala tried to stop them, reminding them that people were already living inside, Rina waved her hand and laughed lightly, as though her sister's words meant nothing. Her husband joined in, brushing off Mala's protest. "Don't worry, we'll manage. Once people know we're family, they'll understand." He acted as if tenants could just be pushed out, as if their contracts and rights held no value compared to a mother's promise. They carried themselves with such entitlement, confident that their mother's word was enough to override laws, papers, and boundaries. Mala stood her ground, blocking the doorway, her voice firm but calm. She told them clearly that the apartment was fully occupied, that families were living there, and that this was not an empty space waiting for them. But instead of listening, Rina smirked. "Mala, stop being difficult. You've always had a way of exaggerating things. Mom said this place is ours now, so why are you trying to create problems?" The arrogance in her sister's tone cut deep. It was the same tone Mala had heard all her life, the tone of someone who was used to having things handed to her without question. Rina rolled her suitcase closer, as if daring Mala to try and stop her. Her husband stood beside her, grinning, certain that nothing could go wrong because their mother had already blessed their move. Inside, Mala felt anger rise, but she did not let it show. She reminded herself that she had more than just emotions. She had proof. She had contracts. She had the law on her side. Rina and her husband might think they could walk in and take over, but Mala knew the truth. This was not their playground. This was her hard work, her sacrifice, her life's foundation. As she stood at the gate, refusing to move, she realized that this moment was bigger than just one argument. This was her chance to finally draw the line, to show her sister and everyone else that she was no longer the invisible one to be pushed aside. This time, she was ready to fight for what was hers. Mala did not raise her voice, and she did not move aside. Instead, she walked back into her small office and returned with a neat folder in her hand. Rina and her husband were still standing with their suitcases, smiling as though nothing could stop them. Mala placed the folder on the table near the entrance and opened it slowly. Inside were the signed rental agreements, stamped and sealed, each one carrying her name as the landlord. She lifted one of the documents and held it in front of them. "Do you see this?" she said quietly but firmly. "Every apartment here is rented. These families pay their rent to me every month. This place is not empty land you can walk into. It is not yours. It is my livelihood." Rina laughed nervously, brushing it off. "Mala, you're making this too serious. We're family. We can adjust with the tenants. You know Mom already gave her word." But Mala shook her head. Her voice did not rise, yet it carried a weight that silenced the laughter. "No, Rina. This is not a playground where you can come and take whatever you like. I built this with years of sacrifice. Every brick here has my sweat in it. If you and your husband want a home, then build one like I did. Do not expect me to hand over mine." Her words landed like heavy stones in the air. For the first time, Rina and her husband stopped smiling. The confidence they carried when they dragged in their suitcases started to fade. They exchanged glances, clearly uncomfortable, but still unwilling to back down. Her husband tried to argue, saying, "But your mother promised us. She said this would be ours." Mala looked directly at him, her tone sharper now. "My mother did not build this. I did. Promises made by her mean nothing here. These papers are the only promises that matter, and they belong to the tenants who live here. Do you think I will betray their trust for your comfort?" The silence grew thick. Even the tenants who had gathered near the windows to watch the commotion began whispering, nodding at Mala's strength. Rena shifted uncomfortably, realizing that things were not going the way she had imagined. In that moment, Mala had drawn her line in stone. There was no space for negotiation, no room for guilt. Her family's favoritism had followed her all her life, but not here. Not in this home she had built with her own hands. The message was clear. Mala was no longer the invisible child. She was the one who set the rules now. Rena did not stop after that first attempt. She kept coming back, sometimes alone and sometimes with her husband, trying to pressure Mala into giving in. She acted as if the apartment was already hers, making comments like, "When we move in, we'll paint this wall," or "We'll need to change the locks." Each word burned Mala, but she remained calm, never stepping back. She knew the truth was on her side. What Rena did not notice was how others were watching. Neighbors began to whisper when they saw her dragging her suitcases again and again, demanding entry into a place she had not built. They had lived around the family long enough to know the story. They had seen Mala working late into the night, walking home with cement dust on her clothes, carrying supplies in the heat of the sun. They remembered how she had gone without luxuries for years just to finish the building. So when Rena arrived with her entitled tone, people could not help but shake their heads. Relatives, too, started noticing. They had always known that the mother favored Rena, but now it was becoming impossible to ignore. At family gatherings, Rena bragged openly, saying things like, "Mom already promised us the apartment," as if Mala's sacrifice meant nothing. Some relatives stayed quiet out of habit, but others began to ask questions. Why is everything always given to Rena? Why can't Mala's hard work be respected for once? These whispers grew louder each time Rena showed her arrogance. The mother, however, still defended her favorite daughter. She told anyone who asked that Mala was strong and could manage, but Rena needed help. She believed her words would silence people like they always had. But this time they did not. Instead, people began to push back. Neighbors spoke up saying, "Mala is not just strong, she is hardworking. That apartment is hers. You cannot take it away from her." Even inside the extended family, cracks began to show. Cousins who once sided with Rena started to feel ashamed of her behavior. Aunts and uncles who had always kept silent began murmuring that the mother was being unfair. Slowly, the favoritism that had once been hidden behind closed doors was now being exposed in the open. Rena's entitled actions made the truth impossible to deny. The more she tried to claim what was not hers, the more she revealed how spoiled and careless she had become. And the more the mother defended her, the more people saw the blindness of her favoritism. It was no longer just Mala who carried the weight of unfairness. Now everyone could see the cracks in the perfect image the mother had tried to create. For the first time, Mala was not alone in her fight. Others were beginning to stand with her, their voices quietly joining hers. The story of the forgotten child was turning into the story of the daughter who was finally seen. While the mother's favoritism started to crumble under its own weight, the mother had always believed that Rena was clever, capable, and deserving of every privilege. She had imagined her favorite daughter stepping into the apartment smoothly, taking over without any problems, and everyone applauding her decision. But reality hit like a thunderstorm. Rena's husband, who had seemed confident and charming, began showing his true colors. He spent recklessly, hiring movers without asking, buying furniture that didn't fit the rooms, and arguing loudly with the tenants about trivial matters. Neighbors began noticing the chaos. Children ran through the hallways, startled by arguments between the couple. Tenants complained about broken doors, misplaced belongings, and sudden demands that made their lives uncomfortable. Mala stayed calm, documenting everything quietly, but even she could see how quickly the situation was spiraling. What her mother had promised with casual confidence was turning into a mess she could no longer ignore. Word of the chaos began to spread. Relatives who had once questioned the favoritism quietly now whispered openly about Rena's behavior. Some aunts and uncles who had supported the mother's decisions started shaking their heads, exchanging looks that spoke louder than words. Even neighbors who had always stayed out of family matters began gossiping, asking one another, "Didn't the mother give that apartment to Rena?" How can she handle it so poorly? The mother began realizing that she had made a serious mistake. Her favorite daughter, who she had assumed could handle anything, was struggling, and her husband's reckless actions were making things worse. She had thought her promise was harmless, a simple gesture to favor Rina, but now it was backfiring spectacularly. Mala's calm, steadfast control of her tenants and property contrasted sharply with the chaos Rina brought in, and the difference was glaring. At first, the mother tried to intervene, giving advice and instructions, but her words fell flat. Rina and her husband either ignored her or argued back, convinced that the mother's support meant they could act without consequence. Slowly, embarrassment settled on the mother's face. She realized that her gamble on Rina's capability had been reckless, and now the mess was public. Tenants, neighbors, and even relatives were aware that the mother had misjudged the situation. For the first time, the mother felt powerless. The image she had carefully crafted of Rina as perfect and deserving was collapsing in front of everyone. The pride she had felt in favoring her younger daughter turned into a heavy shame that weighed on her. She watched helplessly as Mala, the daughter she had overlooked for so long, remained unshaken, strong, and respected by everyone around her. The chaos around Rina exposed the mother's miscalculation, leaving her to face the bitter truth. Her blind favoritism had led to public embarrassment, and the lesson was impossible to ignore. While chaos surrounded Rina and her husband, Mala quietly focused on what mattered most, her tenants and her own growth. She met with each family, listening to their needs, making repairs, and ensuring the apartment felt like home. Unlike Rina, she treated people with respect and fairness. Tenants trusted her, and in return, they paid on time, followed the rules, and spoke highly of her in the neighborhood. Slowly, word spread that Mala was not just a landlord but someone who cared and kept her promises. Mala didn't stop at managing the apartment. She had learned long ago that money alone was not enough. She needed to grow it wisely. She took part of the rent she collected and reinvested it, fixing broken spaces, upgrading facilities, and adding more units where possible. Each small improvement brought more tenants, and each tenant brought more income. Her savings multiplied quietly, steadily, giving her a strong financial base. With careful planning, Mala started a small business on the side, selling household items to her tenants and neighbors. It began modestly, just a few essentials, but her honesty and attention to quality earned her more customers. People trusted her because she had always been fair and reliable. Her reputation grew as someone who worked hard, stayed calm, and delivered results. Even those who had once ignored her began to notice. Neighbors began whispering stories about her. Did you see Mala? She built that apartment herself. She runs her business and treats her tenants like family. All those years no one noticed, and now look at her. Her relatives, too, started realizing that the daughter they had overlooked had not only survived but thrived. Mala's rise was quiet but powerful. Every brick she laid, every contract she honored, every investment she made became a stepping stone to independence. Rina and her husband, meanwhile, struggled with their reckless spending and constant arguments. The contrast between them and Mala could not have been clearer. While they wasted opportunities, Mala built security, wealth, and respect. She became a role model in her community, a symbol of what dedication and smart choices could achieve. People began calling her the daughter who was ignored but built an empire. It was no exaggeration. Her empire was not just in money or property. It was in trust, respect, and the lives she supported. Through her work, Mala's rise was the perfect answer to years of being overlooked. She had turned neglect into strength, disregard into determination, and in doing so, she created a life no one could take away. Her success was not loud or flashy, but it was undeniable, and everyone around her could see that she had become unstoppable. The day of the family gathering arrived, and Mala walked into the room with quiet confidence. The air was thick with tension. Her mother and Rina sat across from her, still trying to hold on to the illusion that they were in control. Rina's smug smile faltered slightly, sensing that something had shifted. Mala's eyes scanned the room, calm but unwavering, and she could feel the weight of every past insult, every overlooked effort, building inside her. When everyone had settled, Mala spoke, her voice steady and clear. "You tried to hand my home to someone else," she said, looking directly at her mother and Rina. "You acted as if my years of hard work, my sacrifices, and my sweat meant nothing. But let me remind you, this apartment was built by me, and for the people who live here. She paused, letting the words sink in. A few relatives shifted uncomfortably, realizing the truth in her statement. Mala continued. Now if you doubt me, just ask my tenants. They live here. They know who protects them, who respects them, and who keeps their home safe. This place was never yours to give away. A hush fell over the room. Even her mother, usually so commanding, looked uncertain. The confident mask of authority she had worn all these years was cracking. Rena opened her mouth to speak, but no words came. The power that had always seemed so firmly in their hands had quietly shifted. Mala's calm authority, backed by truth, hard work, and respect, was undeniable. Neighbors and a few family friends who had come along whispered among themselves, nodding in agreement. They had seen Mala's rise, her steady management of the apartment and her careful protection of the tenants. They had seen Rena's reckless behavior and entitlement. Now everything was clear. Mala was the one in control, the one whose efforts had built something lasting and respected. Mala held her gaze, letting the silence deepen. The room was no longer filled with chatter or false confidence. It was filled with realization. Her mother's favorite, Rena, could no longer claim superiority. The room had witnessed the truth, and Mala's position was unshakable. Finally, she took a slow breath and said nothing more. Her statement had been made. Her presence alone, calm and unyielding, sealed the moment. The power shift was complete. Where once she had been invisible, overlooked, and dismissed, Mala now stood as the one who had built, protected, and thrived. Everyone in that room understood it. Mala was no longer the quiet daughter in the background. She was the force that could not be ignored, the rightful owner of her life, her home, and her respect. The room stayed silent, the truth hanging in the air, undeniable. What do you think? Was Mala right to finally speak her truth, or should family always come first no matter the cost? Comment Team Mala if you stand with her courage. Share this story so others remember. Hard work builds respect that no one can steal. And don't forget to follow for more powerful stories like this.